And is it true? I read in I think a post on your website that Steve Wozniak was your first support call.
Yes, he actually was. He was the first support call in the US.
Okay.
I should add. And as I always joke, I mean, this was at a time when the only people having cell phones that were people like drug dealers and Steve Wozniak. And he actually called in from his cell phone, and he had purchased 2 of the Neteyes. And he couldn't figure out how to operate them fully because the manual wasn't that great in the early days.
Hey, Martin, welcome to our podcast, Shit That You Wish Your Building Did. In this podcast, we like to talk about the intersection of technology and commercial buildings. And, you know, I think video surveillance definitely sits within that framework, and really interesting to talk to you today about your company.
Well, I'm glad to be here. It's a beautiful day here in Stockholm, and the sun is shining.
One of the main reasons I wanted to, or invited you to come along, was to talk obviously about video surveillance, but about innovation. And I know that this year you're celebrating 25 years of the first network video camera.
That's absolutely right. And we're not only celebrating the 25 years of the first network camera, we also celebrate 20 years of the first edge-based video analytics, something actually Axis did back in 2001.
Okay.
And we are celebrating 15 years of the first product with downloadable analytics, which was an old video encoder we introduced in 2006. And it actually you could upload various applications onto it. It was a little bit too early for its time, so it wasn't really a big success. But actually, it really proved where the industry was going.
Yeah.
And we have done so many innovations during the years. I mean, these are just some to highlight.
Exactly, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. So I thought maybe the best place to start would be back in the 25 years, you know, with that camera. If I'm right in saying, it was one frame every 17 seconds?
Yeah, it was kind of slow because at that time there were no video compression chips available that was suited for making an IP camera, because we put the spec that it should be compatible with a web browser, and it had to generate a lot of motion JPEGs, and that was the performance we could get. But we know for sure that we would be able to improve that in the future thanks to Moore's law.
Yeah. And I mean, tell us about that, the decisions you took at that time. I mean, how did it come about? The sort of the genesis of that product, and then, you know, what made you think about going forward with it and developing it?
So what we did was, you should remember that the Axis DNA, we were a print server company connecting printers to networks. And that evolved into becoming an IoT company. I think we were definitely the world's first company to ship IoT in volume in terms of the print servers and the storage servers. And within that framework, we saw an opportunity. Hey, there's video cameras. We can network enable them. They're all analog. There gotta be a market. And what we did was that we decided to do the first network camera more because we could rather than because we saw a market. But Axis, we're very market-oriented, as you know. So when we started designing it, we immediately went to various trade shows. I remember my first IFSEC, and I thought I came back to the Middle Ages. I mean, it was so outdated, the technology they were showing there. So I said, okay, either we are onto something really, really big, or we just don't understand.
So that was the moment for you where you thought, hang on, this could be something that changes the game.
That was IFSEC 96. I mean, this was in May, and I remember we drove up to Scotland afterwards and had a really good time. But I also understood then that this industry is all analog. And it's also the analog way of doing business. I mean, with manufacturers, reps, and so on, inflated pricing. So this we took to our mind when we then decided to launch it in September the very same year. And, the rest is history, so to speak.
Absolutely. And is it true, I read in, I think, a post on your website that Steve Wozniak was your first support call?
Yes, he actually was. He was the first support call in the US,
Okay.
I should add. And as I always joke, I mean, this was at a time when the only people having cell phones, that were people like drug dealers and Steve Wozniak. And he actually called in from his cell phone, and he had purchased 2 of the Neteyes. And he couldn't figure out how to operate them fully because the manual wasn't that great in the early days. But when I got to see him some, I think 7 years ago at ASIS in Chicago, and he was the keynote speaker, and I had booked a private meeting with him.
Yeah.
So he comes in, and I come in, and he says, so why do you want to see me, Martin? And I say, well, it's because you bought the first 2 Neteyes. And then he says, well, I didn't just get 2 of them. I got a whole bunch of them, and I still keep them in my basement. Wow. Now, that's one happy customer and a true innovator. Yeah. And he's a super friendly guy.
Okay, brilliant. I mean, it's fascinating, really. I mean, the whole story about how it developed. And I think not just from the product perspective, but how it changed the market. I mean, again, when did you get a sense that that it had tipped away from analog? Because, I mean, of course, I'm sure you sales ramped up over the years and you were thinking, yeah, okay, we're definitely onto something. But there was still resistance at that point, wasn't there?
I mean, the resistance lasted for quite some time. I mean, at first when we launched the Neteye, I mean, the number one customer request, that was, I already have an existing analog camera, I need to network enable it. And that was like by far the most common request in the early days. So we also invented the world's first video encoder. And that was a customer demand. Then came the 2100, which really was the revolution product, because that's when we brought in embedded Linux into the cameras. And embedded Linux, that's basically how every network camera in the world is built today. But the 2100 was the first. It was the number one selling network camera for 6 years in a row. And we probably could have sold it for another 5 years if we had had access to the components. So this made the network cameras popular. We also got competition. That's when Sony introduced one, D-Link, and some others. So then that legitimized the market and industry. So
what year was that?
I think it was 2001. Okay. Maybe I should ask someone at Sony to have it confirmed. Right. Yeah. But I think that was the year. Yeah. And then you're asking what year, I mean, was really the tipping point? Well, if you remember in the early 2000s, there was a megapixel race, and initially Axis was a bit late because we were just focusing on transforming existing installations from analog to IP. But we introduced our first 1.3 megapixel camera, I think was in 2003, maybe 4. And then the debate was, okay, how many megapixels? And you all remember from the still camera war, it was also about megapixels, and then the cell phones. So the tipping point, I think, really came in 2008, 2009, because that's when everyone started to get the flat TVs at home. And what resolution did they have? You remember? They were HD. It was HD and full HD. So at Axis, we took the position, okay, all our products should be HD, because an average person can remember analog NTSC resolution and HD, that's what they have in the living room. Why should they settle for less? As a security professional, that's kind of stupid. So it was a very strong message. And we also matched it with a new compression, because the early network cameras, they were all motion JPEG. And with full HD, motion JPEG was simply too much data. And that's when H.264 compression came in. And what we did at Axis was that we went to our partners and we told them, you gotta do this H.264. And basically initially they refused, but we gave them a big carrot. And as we say in Sweden at least. So they really were motivated to do it. We invited them for free to various events if they had good support for H.264 and HD. And in 1 year, the year of 2009, in the beginning was like 2 or 3% of our sales were HD. In the end of the year, 90% of our sales. I remember we had some luck as well, because this was the financial crisis, the recession of 2008 and 9. So most of our competitors, they were cutting down on spending. And we all remember, how Pelco got acquired by Schneider. And Schneider put a travel ban on all the salespeople. And they did a lot of silly things at Pelco. They stopped the tech support, which was really the DNA of Pelco. They made so many mistakes at that time. And that just helped us because we were not cutting down on spending. We were growing like crazy. And that was definitely the year that when everyone realized that the future is not analog. And network cameras are winning. I think it was like 2017 or maybe 18, which really was the year when analog passed away for good.
Yeah. Yep. I saw recently as well, you published an article on TechCrunch. One thing that stood out to me, you mentioned connected cameras weren't something the market had been clamoring for, and many experts questioned they were even necessary. And it kind of reminds me of, that quote they say that Henry Ford never made about if they'd asked me what I wanted, they'd say faster horses.
Exactly.
Sort of that speaks, I guess, to, innovation and like how within a company you think about it. Why did you at that time not sort of think too much about the consensus in the industry and decide to do something that was different?
Well, because we had we didn't have a legacy. We were a print server company. We knew that print servers were going to be built into the printers and that we had to switch and do something else. And here the camera, it's growing like crazy. We were, with the 2100 that year, we grew more than 150%. And that was actually from relatively high numbers. So we really saw that this is something big, and not having the legacy of analog business model. We could also innovate there. So our innovation was really very basic, and that was the strict two-tiered distribution model, where we sell to a distributor who sells to the integrator, who sells to the end user, and makes a best of breed and a good ecosystem. And that was not the case with analog. Remember Pelco, they were selling Pelco cabling, Pelco everything. And that just doesn't work in a network environment.
Yeah, so they had to protect what they already had, whereas you were able to come and think about things differently and put in the right structure to sell that product. Yeah. And in sort of slightly switching subject, but in that same article, I think one of the other things I saw were your comments about cybersecurity, which is something we've written a lot about, and I think it's really interesting, especially at the moment. I think you said cybersecurity will also be a growing concern for both manufacturers and end users. And, we actually have experienced something here in Sweden quite recently with a retail company going down for at least a few days, I think, because of a hack. What are your thoughts on what where we are at the moment with that?
Well, people don't understand the importance and need of cybersecurity. So many people have bad passwords, and with social engineering, it's really easy. To make it into various sites. So when talking about embedded devices, it's even worse. Because an integrator could sell them, and in worst case, the integrator has a hidden backdoor that he puts into the cameras, so that all his systems actually have the same password and user IDs. And that's, of course, horrible, but it's unfortunately very common.
Yeah, we're still seeing it, right? There was something earlier this year.
And then there are bugs. There is no software that's bug-free, not even an Axis software. But what matters is that if you have procedures. So if you look on cybersecurity, I always say that it breaks down to the 3 factors of time. So the number one is the time to actually fix it. So once a cybersecurity researcher or once your internal cyber department finds a bug, it is the time it actually takes for you to fix it. And the time to fix it in not just one product, but obviously all your firmwares. The second time is when the time to communicate it, to get it out. And the other time is also the time that the the end user needs to take in order to do the upgrades, because this could be quite cumbersome if you have tens of thousands of cameras spread around the country. And then finally, it's the time that you're using your products. So we give a normal 3-year warranty. We tell the customer that they should work for 5 years. And in reality, average life is probably 7 years. But we have all seen black and white cameras, analog cameras at airports, which are like 25 years old. So the real life can be much longer. So in order to cope with this, at Axis, we have a concept that we call LTS, Long-Term Support. And that means that we guarantee to upgrade our products for cybersecurity issues over a longer time than the warranty. And that promise is free of charge. So you can keep on using your old cameras and upgrade them. And we cannot say an exact time, but our target is 5 to 7 years, because in the end, it's impossible to even upgrade because they run out of memory, new libraries, and blah, 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 blah. So we cannot guarantee forever, but we guarantee for as long as it's technically viable.
Okay.
And that's quite a strong promise, actually.
Yeah.
And it really, really reduces the lifetime cost for the end user.
Yeah, it's a fascinating subject. I mean, you've given a sort of perspective there from the manufacturer. It makes great sense. What would you sort of give advice to? Because again, we have to think about the installer and the end user in this process of being secure, being cyber secure. Was there advice you would give to installers about best practice or?
Well, the best practice is of course, to have procedures for managing the upgrades. But one should also understand that many of the cameras, especially in larger systems, so they come with a lot of other software. So they come with like an enterprise software like a Genetec or Milestone, and they come with other integrations. And what typically happens is that the customer gets stuck in an old version. So they cannot upgrade the Milestone or Genetec as often as they would like. And that means that sometimes they also require old versions of the Axis cameras. So I think the number one rule is to have the video surveillance camera network air-gapped compared to the rest of the network, and also in relation to the internet.
Okay, and by that you mean basically making sure it's separated from other enterprise networks.
Well, it's at least separated. And of course, you can have someone hack in because there could be this empty like TeamViewer PC sitting along. That's how they broke into that retailer here in Sweden that was down for almost a week. So there are always going to be holes. So even though you're air-gapped, you still need to adhere to good security standards. But at least you minimize the risk compared to not being air-gapped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, again, something we identified as well. I think that's really good advice. Something else I wanted to ask as well was about your system on chip. Actually, you've just come out with this 8th generation.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, it's I didn't realize this, but it's sort of quite a long history of you developing your own your own silicon, right?
Yes, we did our first silicon for the print servers. That was in 1987. And I remember, I was designing that chip myself. I was in Bracknell in England. It's a horrible place, by the way. But I lived in Eton, which is a nice place.
Okay.
Yeah. But that was the first print server chip we did. And during that IFSEC in 1996, when I saw everything being analog, that's where I said, we gotta make a chip here. So we hadn't yet launched the camera, and I had a deal with the board. And the deal was if I could sell 10,000 of the Neteyes, we would create a camera division. We actually managed to sell 14,000 of them, despite the really bad performance. But we found a lot of niche applications. It's a lot of applications that require like a frame a day. So, for instance, we were looking at cell phone towers. And when you're looking at the cell phone tower, you look at it because of course, people are not stealing cell phone towers. Maybe they are, but not to my knowledge. But they look that the wind may have moved them out of direction. And then you have a reference picture and you can compare with. So after a storm, you want to see, is it still intact? Are we pointing in the right direction or not? That's a typical 1 frame a day application.
Yeah.
So we decided quite early that we gotta make this chip because we saw the opportunity. So the chip, we started the design in 97, and all the work was in 98, and that's all good things. It was a little bit delayed, so we got it early in 99, and that was what enabled us to do the full frame video encoder and network cameras.
Okay. So, I mean, really, it drove the business. And I think that was my next question was, I mean, how important has it been to have your own custom chips?
Oh, it's been essential. I mean, having the chips, I mean, back in the 2000, when we did not have a chip, after all, we would never have conquered the industry by 1 frame every 17 seconds. And then we did the second and third iteration and so on. They kept on improving. We did MPEG-4, which was really, nobody picked it up because it was so cumbersome to use and it really didn't get a lot of benefits. But H.264 was totally different because the savings were so big. So it was worth the effort of implementing it. And today, I mean, everyone in the industry is using H.264. Our next big breakthrough was, I think, ArtPack 5, when we introduced the ZipStream, which was the first smart compression algorithm. So by having the ZipStream, we could still, within the framework of H.264, reduce the bandwidth significantly. And especially if you look on a backdoor where there's no data, it really breaks down to no data. And that saves so much money on the storage. And now, this year, we're introducing the ArtPack 8. It's our last iteration of the ArtPack. And this time, it comes, as usual, with improved image quality. But it also comes with a deep learning block. So now all the ArtPack 8-based cameras can do deep learning. And that means that we will significantly improve the quality of all the analytics. So we have an analytics suite we call the Axis Object Analyzer. So it's various forms of motion detection, cross-line detection, and so on. And thanks to the deep learning aspect, they are going to become even more reliable than the previous versions.
What do you think that means to, let's say, innovation? You see, we look a lot at startup companies that are coming through, not just in the security industry, but across sort of smart buildings. But we've seen a lot of new startups trying to look at AI applied to computer vision and video surveillance. But I mean, if you're not doing your own silicon, does that put you at a disadvantage, or does it mean that it's just harder to innovate if you don't have the resources to put into developing?
I think it will be harder to innovate because it all begins with having good image quality, right? I mean, if you have good image quality, you do better analytics than if you have bad image quality. That's sort of a given. And our ArtPacks give us really, really amazing image quality. And I think everyone in the industry agrees on that. And we're also optimized for the video surveillance use case. They're not optimized for giving a beautiful video conference solution. It's very different technologies of compression. And then, I mean, by having it embedded on the chip, it gives a lot of advantages. But we all see, I mean, there are so many startups coming out. And of course, some of them are going to be successful. That's sort of a given. But it's also a lot of problems involved because there have been so many startups. I mean, every university has like an image processing department. They also have an incubator department and a scale-up department. And what typically happens is that there are these guys who have, or girls who have some really cool idea on image processing. And they have a professor that loves them. And then they go to the incubator and say, hey, video surveillance, it's a manual industry. We're not using a lot of analytics. You're onto something big. We can help you. And then they help them. And then they say, hey, you know what? You got to protect what you're doing. You got to get some patents. So then they apply, they get some patents, they get some seed funding from some local angels, and they try to scale it up. But in general, 99 out of 100 startups fail. And then the people who put in the money, they say, hey, so you had all those valuable patents. What are you going to do with them? Don't they hold a lot of value, as you told us? And then they basically get forced to sell them. So then they sell those patents to various patent trolls, such as Acacia Networks and so on. And that means that if you are a successful video startup, once you really do some business, you know for sure you're going to be sued by the patent trolls. So it's a nasty climate out there.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. I mean, on that theme of kind of innovation, I mean, I've seen over the years you've bought quite a few different, and not just in video, right? Different products to market. I'm thinking like the audio networked audio, also the body-worn cameras. That was something a new product line you released recently. How do you? I mean, it'd be interesting just for you to talk a little bit about, taking an idea, right? And then, I mean, how do you bring that product and then how through to market?
So when we innovate, we always look for our business model and channel. So Axis, we have like 200 distributors globally and 80,000 integrated partners. That's a lot. So we got to look for what can our partners do. So they're security professionals in general. And we learned that, hey, we have a video surveillance system and we see some bad guys going out there. What do you want to do? You want to talk to them and say, hey, go away. Most people, they do go away when they see someone is watching them. And that's really how we got the idea of the horn speaker. So we complement our video surveillance systems with speakers. And then not just horn speakers for like a perimeter. We do cabinet speakers for like railway platforms, railway stations, airports, and also shopping malls or even education market. It's a lot of need for audio to complement the video. So we try to innovate from what we can sell, where we have customer synergies. We at Axis, we don't do like machine vision cameras. And of course, technically, it's very similar, but it's a completely different use case. Sitting in a factory in a controlled light environment, doing super advanced analytics on the edge. And that type of analytics, I think, is more suited for the specialty providers. In theory, we could do it, but our business model wouldn't really scale.
And internally, how would you set that up, like, and incubate that product within? Do you create a new department and then bring the product through?
What we do is that we actually have two departments. So we have one department where I'm actually working myself. It's called New Business. And it's a department that tries to innovate outside video products, but according to the business model. So we try to do customer-centric products. Then we have another department. It's called the New Concepts and Ideas. The New Concept and Ideas, they basically try to do what's possible from a technology point of view, not necessarily with our customers in mind. Of course, a little bit. I'm part of a reference group for them, but they really try to be more technologically driven than customer driven. And it's actually a good combination. So for instance, the network radar, that came out of a New Concepts and ID group. The audio products, they came out of a New Business team. So we complement each other, and of course we work together. But I guess you see the difference from developing it from a technology point of view rather than a customer market point of view.
Right, those two different perspectives. Yeah. They can work together.
And you need both.
Yeah. One last question for you. Over this sort of journey you've been on the last 25 years, are there things or one thing in particular that stand out as something you would have done differently?
Well, there always are. I probably could give you write a book on the subject, sure. All the mistakes we did. But in general, I mean, most things were good. For instance, we were late on megapixel because we were so focused on replacing the existing business. I think we were a bit late on power over Ethernet. That was definitely by far the number one driver for network cameras, because you didn't need a certified electrician to plug the cables. Very simple fact. We had At Axis, we didn't focus enough on the software side of it. We just focused on the hardware because that's what we know the best. There are so many things you can name.
And just broadening that out a little bit, is there something, and I suppose right now, right, in the industry, video surveillance, do you think, that should be changed or that you would like to see changed?
Well, put it like this. We see a strong change in the industry of the customers. They seem to want now go to that they want to buy a complete solution, especially for the small and mid-sized solutions from one vendor. That's a very strong trend that we have to adapt to. So that's why we start providing recorders and smaller scale software, still using exactly the same business model. And for the enterprise customer and the larger mid-sized customer, depending on how you define it, we always see the partner approach because they always need specialty applications. It becomes more and more complicated. We also see, as always, increased use of analytics. It's still not, the super fancy analytics, but definitely we see higher and higher uptake of it.
Great. Martin, that's all my questions for today. I'd just to say it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining me. And I wish you another 25 years of success.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Bye-bye.